They laughed when I walked into that courtroom. My mother's contemptuous smile, my father's disappointed headshake, my brother's smirk. They had carved my name into their hearts as an embarrassment, a stain on the Montgomery legacy. But today, standing in the Multnomah County Courthouse in Portland, Oregon, they would learn that Sarah Vance was no longer their puppet. The courthouse smelled of old wood and broken promises. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing through the tense silence. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, but I refused to turn around. Not yet. 5 years of planning, 5 years of living in the shadows, 5 years of collecting the pieces of a puzzle they thought they had destroyed. All of it led to this moment. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the night that shattered whatever illusion of family I had left. It was autumn of 2014, and Montgomery real estate was drowning. The financial crisis had hit us hard, and the company my grandfather built from nothing was 3 months away from bankruptcy. I remember sitting in my office on the 20th floor of our downtown Portland building, staring at spreadsheets that made my eyes burn. As CEO, I had poured every ounce of my energy into saving this company. I liquidated my personal savings, took out loans against my own assets, worked 18-hour days until my hands shook from exhaustion. I did it because I believed in the legacy. I believed in family. By spring of 2015, we were stable again. The quarterly reports showed profit for the first time in 2 years. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I was called into a board meeting where my own father sat at the head of the table, flanked by my mother Vivian and my brother Mark. The lawyers were there too, their faces carefully neutral. "Sarah," my father Richard began, his voice cold as January rain, "the board has concerns about certain financial irregularities during the crisis period." I felt my stomach drop. What irregularities? "It appears you may have manipulated company funds for personal gain," Mark said, sliding a folder across the table. His smile was the same one he used to give me when we were children and he broke my toys. The documents inside were sophisticated forgeries, showing transfers that never happened, accounts I had never opened. They had built an entire narrative of embezzlement around my desperate efforts to save the company. "This is absurd," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "These are fabricated. I used my own money to save this company." My mother finally spoke, her pearl necklace catching the light. "Darling, you were always so dramatic. The board has made its decision. Effective immediately, you are terminated. Mark will assume the CEO position." I looked at each of them, searching for any crack in their facade, any hint of the family I thought I knew. There was nothing, just cold calculation and barely concealed satisfaction. "We expect you to sign this non-disclosure agreement," my father added, pushing another document toward me. "In exchange, we won't press criminal charges." The air left my lungs. They were not just firing me, they were erasing me, threatening me, making sure I would disappear quietly into the background of their success story. That night, they invited me to dinner at the Montgomery estate, a sprawling Victorian mansion in Portland's West Hills. I went because some foolish part of me hoped for an explanation, an apology, something human. The dining room was exactly as I remembered from childhood, all dark wood and crystal chandeliers, beautiful and suffocating. "You should be grateful," my mother said, as she cut her filet mignon. "We raised you, gave you opportunities. You were born to serve this family, Sarah, not to lead it." My father nodded, sipping his wine. "Your grandfather spoiled you with attention, made you think you were special. But you were always meant to support the real heirs, not replace them." Mark laughed, actually laughed as he reached for the breadbasket. "Come on, Sarah. Did you really think we would let you keep the company? You are just a woman. Grandfather would have eventually seen reason." I set down my fork carefully. My hands were not shaking anymore. Something inside me had frozen solid, hard as diamond, sharp as glass. I looked at each of them, memorizing their faces, their casual cruelty, their absolute certainty that I would accept this humiliation. "You will regret this day," I said quietly. My mother rolled her eyes. Do not be theatrical, dear. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I am not being theatrical. I am making a promise. I walked out of that house with only my purse and my phone, but before I left, I made one stop at my old office. My access card still worked. They had been too arrogant to deactivate it immediately. I downloaded every financial record I could access, every email, every document that might someday prove useful. Then I disappeared. For 5 years, I lived small. I rented a studio apartment in Southeast Portland, in a neighborhood my family would never visit. I worked as a financial consultant under my middle name, built a modest life, and most importantly, I waited. I knew my family well enough to know they could not resist gloating, could not resist expanding on their victory. And I knew that somewhere in the empire my grandfather built, there were secrets they had buried. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, 5 years after that dinner. No return address, just my name, written in elegant script. Inside was a document that made my heart stop. My grandfather's will. The real one. I had seen the will they probated when grandfather died 15 years ago. It left everything to my father, with provisions for my mother and brother. My name was mentioned only as a recipient of a small trust fund. But this document was different. This one, sealed with my grandfather's personal wax seal, left the entire Montgomery Empire to me. The accompanying letter was from someone named Caleb Finch. It was brief. Your grandfather was my mentor. I was there when he wrote this will. I was also there when they tried to make me change it. I refused and disappeared because I valued my life. Now I am old and tired of carrying this secret. Meet me at the Hawthorne Coffee House on Thursday at 2. Come alone. My hands trembled as I held the document. This was it. This was the key to everything. Thursday afternoon, I walked into the small coffee shop in Portland's Hawthorne district. It was the kind of place my family would consider beneath them, all mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. An elderly man sat in the corner booth, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "Sarah?" he said as I approached. His eyes were kind but haunted. "Mr. Finch?" "Call me Caleb. Sit down. We do not have much time and I have a lot to tell you." Over the next 2 hours, Caleb told me everything. He had been my grandfather's assistant and friend for 30 years. He had been in the room when grandfather wrote his true will 3 months before he died. Grandfather had known he was sick. He had also known his son Richard was weak, easily manipulated by his ambitious wife. He had watched Mark grow into a spoiled, incompetent man. But he had watched me, his only granddaughter, work harder than anyone else, fight for every achievement, prove myself over and over. He told me, "Sarah has the Montgomery fire. The others just have the Montgomery name," Caleb said, his voice thick with memory. "Then how did they change the will?" I asked. "Your father hired a lawyer named Gerald Pine to handle the estate. Pine approached me first, offered me money to alter the will. When I refused, he threatened me. I went to your grandfather, but he died 2 days later. Suddenly. Too suddenly." Pine produced a different will at the reading. I tried to contest it, but then my office was broken into, my files destroyed. I received a visit from 2 men who made it clear that if I spoke up, I would not live long enough to testify. So I ran. He reached into his coat and pulled out a USB drive. "Everything is here. Grandfather's original will, witnessed and notarized. Copies of Pine's communications with your father. And something else. I recorded Pine's confession before he died last year. He was eaten by guilt, dying of cancer. Wanted to clear his conscience." I took the USB with shaking hands. "Why now? Why wait so long?" "Because I was a coward," he said simply. "But I watched you these past 5 years. I know what they did to you. And I decided that some things are worth dying for. Justice is one of them." I spent the next week examining everything on that drive. The evidence was overwhelming. My grandfather's signature on the fake will was a forgery, traced from other documents. The witnesses were paid actors. There were bank records showing large transfers from my father to Pine. And there was the video confession. 20 minutes of Gerald Pine detailing exactly how he had helped my family commit fraud. But I needed more. I needed something that would destroy them completely. Something they could not explain away with expensive lawyers. The answer came from an unexpected source. I remembered my grandfather's housekeeper, Mrs. Henley, a kind woman who had worked for our family for decades. I tracked her down to a nursing home in Salem, about an hour south of Portland. Mrs. Henley was 84 now, her hands twisted with arthritis, but her mind was sharp. When I walked into her room, she started crying. "Sarah, sweet girl, I have been praying you would come. Mrs. Henley, I need to ask you about my grandfather's will." She nodded, reaching for a photo album on her bedside table. "I was there that day. Your grandfather asked me to witness the signing. He wanted someone he trusted in the room." She showed me a photograph I had never seen. My grandfather at his desk signing a document. His lawyer, Gerald Pine, standing beside him. And in the background, barely visible through the doorway, my mother, Vivian, watching. "She was always watching," Mrs. Henley said softly. "She hated that your grandfather loved you most. She used to say terrible things about you when he was not around. And after he died, she made sure I was let go within a month." "Do you remember anything specific about that day?" I asked. "I remember your grandfather saying, 'This will make things right. Sarah will know what to do.' And I remember your mother's face when she thought no one was looking. She looked like she wanted to set fire to that document." Mrs. Henley gave me the photograph and a signed statement of what she witnessed. It was another piece of the puzzle, but I needed the final piece, the smoking gun that would tie everything together. That came in the form of a trap. My brother Mark had never been smart. 2 weeks after my meeting with Mrs. Henley, I received a text from him, the first contact in 5 years. "Meet me at the lake house. We need to talk about grandfather's legacy. Maybe we can work something out." The lake house sat on the shore of Crater Lake, a 6-hour drive from Portland. It was where my grandfather had taught me to row a boat, where we had spent summers reading and talking about business and life. It was also isolated, surrounded by forest, far from witnesses. I went, but not unprepared. I wore a wire. I brought Caleb, who waited in a car half a mile away, ready to call the police if I did not check in every 30 minutes. My family was waiting when I arrived at sunset. All 3 of them, sitting on the porch like they owned not just the house but the entire world. My mother looked older, lines of stress around her mouth. My father's hair had gone completely gray. Mark had gained weight, his face puffy with too much good living. "Sarah," my father said as I climbed the porch steps. "Thank you for coming." "What do you want?" I asked, staying standing while they sat. "We have been thinking," my mother began, her voice honeyed with false warmth. "Perhaps we were too harsh 5 years ago. Perhaps there is a place for you in the family again." "In exchange for what?" I asked. Mark pulled out a document. "Just sign this. It is a formal renunciation of any claim to grandfather's estate. Do that, and we will give you a position in the company. Not CEO, of course, but something respectable." "You want me to sign away my inheritance?" I said slowly. "What inheritance?" my father scoffed. "You were barely mentioned in the will. This is just a formality." "Is it?" I asked. "Or are you worried about something?" The atmosphere changed instantly. My mother's smile vanished. My father's jaw clenched. "What have you been doing, Sarah?" Mark demanded. "Have you been digging into things that do not concern you?" "Everything about my grandfather concerns me," I said. "He was the only one in this family who ever saw my worth." "He was a senile old man at the end," my mother snapped. "He did not know what he was doing." "He knew exactly what he was doing," I said. "He wrote a will that left everything to me, and you destroyed it." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched the realization dawn on their faces, the panic, the calculation. You cannot prove that, my father said finally. Can I not? Gerald Pine kept excellent records, and he had a crisis of conscience before he died. Very thorough confession, very detailed. Mark stood up abruptly. You are bluffing. Pine is dead. He cannot testify. No, but his video testimony can. And the documents he saved. And the witnesses who watched you commit fraud. You do not understand what you are doing. If you pursue this, you will tear this family apart. This family tore itself apart the day you threw me out like garbage, I said, my voice steady. I am just making sure everyone knows the truth. How much do you want? My mother asked suddenly. Name your price. We can make this go away. There is no price, I said. I want justice. That was when Mark made his fatal mistake. He was always the weak link, the one who could not control his tongue when he was angry. Dad already took care of Pine once, he blurted out. He can take care of anyone else who gets in our way. The world seemed to stop. My father grabbed Mark's arm, but it was too late. Those words hung in the air like a noose. What do you mean, took care of Pine? I asked softly. Mark realized his error, his face going pale. I just meant we paid him. No, I said. You said he took care of him. Pine disappeared for 15 years before he died of cancer. Where was he, Mark? What did Dad do to make him disappear? Nobody answered, but I could see it in my father's eyes. The truth. The terrible truth. You are recording this, are not you? My mother said suddenly, her voice sharp. I smiled, cold and hard. Every word. I turned and walked away, down the porch steps, toward my car. Behind me I heard shouting, my mother screaming my name, my father yelling at Mark. But I did not stop. I got in my car and drove away, leaving their panic behind me. 3 days later, I handed everything to Sandra Nguyen, a federal prosecutor in Portland, who specialized in white-collar crime. I had researched her carefully. She was tough, incorruptible, and she had a reputation for taking down powerful families who thought they were above the law. Sandra spread the documents across her desk, watched the videos, read the statements. When she finished, she looked at me with something like awe. This is ironclad, she said. They are going to prison. I do not care about prison, I said. I care about the truth coming out. I care about my grandfather's wishes being honored. You will get both, she promised. Before the trial, I did one more thing. I drove back to Crater Lake, to the small cemetery where my grandfather was buried. I brought white orchids, his favorite flower. I sat by his headstone and talked to him like I used to when I was a child. I found it, grandfather, your real will. And I am going to make sure everyone knows what you wanted. Not for the money. For you. For the truth. The trial began on a cold morning in January, exactly 6 years after that dinner where my family tried to erase me. The Multnomah County Courthouse was packed. The Montgomery scandal had made headlines for weeks. A powerful Portland family accused of fraud, forgery, and possibly worse. I wore black, my hair pulled back, my expression calm. I had practiced this moment in my mind 1,000 times, but nothing prepared me for the reality of walking past my family in the gallery. My mother looked haggard, her expensive clothes hanging on a frame that had lost weight. My father stared straight ahead, refusing to meet my eyes. Mark looked terrified. The prosecution's case was devastating. They played the recording from the lake house. The courtroom was dead silent as Mark's voice echoed. Dad already took care of Pine once. He can take care of anyone else who gets in our way. My mother jumped to her feet. That recording is fake. She manipulated him. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Mitchell, banged her gavel. Mrs. Montgomery, sit down or I will have you removed. Next came Caleb's testimony. He was elderly, his voice sometimes shaking, but his story was clear and consistent. He detailed how my father and Gerald Pine had approached him, threatened him, forced him to flee. I should have been braver, Caleb said, looking directly at me. I should have fought for Gerald Montgomery's wishes. but I was afraid. I am not afraid anymore. Then came the forensic document analyst who would examine the wills. She showed the jury, point by point, how the signature on the probated will was a forgery, how the paper was different, how the witnesses were not who they claimed to be. Mrs. Henley testified via video link from her nursing home. She told the story of that day, of my grandfather's intentions, of my mother lurking in the background. She showed them the photograph. Finally, they played Gerald Pine's confession. The dying lawyer's voice was raspy but clear. He detailed everything. How Richard Montgomery had paid him $200,000 to create a false will. How they had threatened Caleb Finch. How Pine had lived in fear for years, moving from town to town, until the cancer made him stop running. I did terrible things for money, Pine said on the video, his sunken eyes staring into the camera. But I want to die with a clean conscience. Gerald Montgomery was a good man who loved his granddaughter. His family betrayed him. I helped them do it. I am sorry. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of someone crying. I turned and saw it was my father, tears running down his face, his shoulders shaking. The final piece of evidence was the document I placed on the judge's desk myself. It was a letter, found in a safety deposit box that Caleb had opened with the key my grandfather had given him. Judge Mitchell read it aloud. To whom it may concern. If Sarah Vance stands before you, she has carried more than any man in this family ever has. She has earned everything I built, not through blood, but through merit. She is a Montgomery in the only way that matters. She has integrity. Richard Montgomery, Vivian Montgomery, and Mark Montgomery do not deserve the Montgomery name. My granddaughter does. Gerald Montgomery, signed and witnessed, this 15th day of August. The judge set down the letter. She looked at my family with something close to disgust. This case is not complicated, she said. This is criminal. The fraud is evident. The conspiracy is documented. The betrayal is absolute. She turned to my father. Mr. Montgomery, you and your wife and son will be formally charged with fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Additionally, the prosecutor has indicated she will be investigating the circumstances of Gerald Pine's disappearance and the threats made against Caleb Finch. My mother let out a wail. My father bowed his head. Mark whispered, You won, Sarah, but we lost everything. I looked at him, at all of them, and felt nothing but a strange emptiness. I did not take anything, I said quietly. I just returned what you destroyed. The judge's final ruling came 2 weeks later. The fraudulent will was voided. My grandfather's true will was validated. Montgomery Real Estate, all the properties, all the assets, everything, was transferred to me. My father, mother, and brother were convicted and sentenced to prison terms ranging from 5 to 12 years. I walked out of that courtroom into the January rain. Caleb was waiting for me on the steps, holding an umbrella. How do you feel? He asked. Free, I said. 1 year later, I stood in my office on the 20th floor of the Montgomery Building, looking out over downtown Portland. The city lights sparkled in the evening darkness. Behind me, the office had been completely redecorated, all trace of my father's tenure erased. I had kept my promise to my grandfather. I had taken the company and transformed it. I established the Montgomery Integrity and Governance Fund, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and fighting corporate fraud. I donated half the estate's value to causes my grandfather would have approved of: education, small business development, programs for underprivileged youth who wanted to break into real estate. A reporter asked me in an interview if I had forgiven my family. I smiled, not for the cameras but for myself. Forgiveness is not about letting them go. It is about letting me live. My family served their sentences in separate facilities. My mother's lawyer contacted me once, asking if I would support an early release petition. I declined. My father never reached out at all. Mark sent a letter from prison, full of self-pity and blame. I read it once and threw it away. The truth was, I thought about them less and less. They had taken up so much space in my life, first as the family I loved, then as the enemy I fought. But now they were just part of my past, a chapter that had closed. I began teaching at Portland Law School, a once-a-week seminar on corporate ethics and governance. On my first day, I wrote on the board, "Integrity builds legacy. Legacy is not given, it is earned." The students watched me with curious eyes. These young people who knew my story from the news, who saw me as someone who had won against impossible odds. "Let me tell you something my grandfather taught me," I said, turning to face them. "Power without integrity is just tyranny with better marketing. Money without morals is just greed with better clothes. Family without respect is just people who share blood, but nothing else." I spent my afternoons at the Hawthorne Coffee House, the place where Caleb had first given me hope. I bought the building and turned the upper floor into offices for the Integrity Fund. Caleb worked there part-time, mentoring young lawyers who wanted to fight corruption. One spring morning, I drove back to Crater Lake. The water was impossibly blue, reflecting the sky like a mirror. I sat on the dock where my grandfather had taught me to row, where I had last confronted my family. I thought about that night, about Mark's confession, about the fear in their eyes when they realized I had been recording everything. I thought about how they had underestimated me my entire life, how they had seen me as weak, pliable, controllable. They had been wrong. I pulled out the last letter my grandfather had written to me, found in that safety deposit box with his true will. I had read it 100 times, but I read it once more. "Sarah, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are fighting. Fight hard, my girl. Fight smart. Fight clean. But never stop fighting for what is right. You have something your father never had, something money cannot buy and power cannot fake. You have character. That makes you unstoppable." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in my pocket. Then I stood up, brushed off my jeans, and walked back to my car. There was work to do. There were companies to build, laws to change, people to help. My grandfather had given me a legacy, but I was building my own. 6 months later, I stood in front of a packed auditorium at a conference for women in business. The topic was overcoming adversity. I had been reluctant to speak publicly about my story, but my assistant convinced me it might help others. "People ask me if revenge was worth it," I said into the microphone, looking out at hundreds of faces. But it was never about revenge. It was about truth. It was about honoring the one person who believed in me when no one else did. It was about refusing to let lies become my reality. A young woman in the front row raised her hand during the question period. "Do you regret sending your family to prison?" I paused, considering the question honestly. No. They did not go to prison because of me. They went to prison because they committed crimes. They destroyed evidence, forged documents, threatened people, and possibly worse. I just made sure the truth came out. What happened after that was the consequence of their choices, not mine. Another hand went up. "Would you do it again?" "Every single time," I said without hesitation, because the alternative was to live a lie, to let them erase not just my inheritance but my grandfather's wishes, my value, my truth. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight costs you everything you thought you had. The applause was thunderous. After the speech, dozens of people wanted to talk to me, to tell me their own stories of family betrayal, of corporate fraud, of fighting systems that seemed unbeatable. I listened to each one, gave advice where I could, and made connections that might help them. This was the legacy I was building. Not just a company, but a movement. Not just justice for myself, but a framework to help others find their own justice. That evening, I returned to my apartment in Southeast Portland. I had never moved from that modest studio, despite now having access to unlimited resources. It reminded me of who I was when I had nothing, when all I had was determination and a hunger for truth. My phone buzzed with a message from Caleb. Board meeting tomorrow at 9. Wynne wants to discuss the new whistleblower program. Also, Mrs. Henley is asking about you. She wants to know if you will visit. I smiled and typed back. Tell her I will be there this weekend, and I am bringing her favorite cookies. I looked around my small apartment at the simple furniture, the stacks of law books, the framed photograph of my grandfather and me at Crater Lake, both of us laughing. This was enough. This was everything. They had laughed when I walked into that courtroom, certain of their victory, certain that money and name and connections would protect them from consequences. They had not understood that I was not the scared girl they had discarded. I was my grandfather's granddaughter, forged in betrayal, strengthened by struggle, unbreakable in my pursuit of what was right. I had walked into that courtroom as a woman with nothing to lose and everything to prove. I had walked out, free, while they remained imprisoned by the lies they had built their lives upon. In the end, it was not about the company or the money or the victory. It was about standing in front of a mirror and seeing someone I respected, someone my grandfather would have been proud of, someone who chose truth over comfort and integrity over acceptance. I was Sarah Vance, granddaughter of Gerald Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Real Estate, founder of the Integrity Fund, and most importantly, a woman who refused to let anyone write her story but herself. They laughed when I walked in, but I walked out free. And they lost everything, forever.